He raised his glass and called me the love of his life, celebrating 15 years of marriage and love, smiling like the faithful husband everyone thought he was. But what they didn't know, that I knew, was that his mistress was sitting right there in the same room. He toasted me while secretly betraying me, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. Before I dive into this story, I want to know something. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your country in the comments because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, if you enjoy these kinds of savage revenge stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep bringing you more. I can still remember the way the chandelier lights shimmered above the ballroom, like 1,000 tiny suns reflecting off the champagne flutes clinking all around me. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and perfume, the sound of laughter bouncing off every marble wall. To anyone watching, it must have looked like the perfect evening, a celebration of love, commitment, and 15 years of marriage. But I wasn't celebrating. I stood there, glass in hand, my smile painted on like cheap stage makeup, watching people embrace, toast, and laugh as though everything in my life was flawless. My husband, Daniel, was in his element. His arm was draped casually around my waist as he introduced me to colleagues and friends. He kissed my tempo when they complimented us on being the golden couple, and I felt the bile rise in my throat each time. Because they didn't know. None of them knew. They didn't know the truth hiding behind the expensive suit Daniel wore or the perfectly tailored dress I had chosen so carefully that evening. They didn't know that just beneath my calm exterior, my heart wasn't celebrating, it was calculating. I had spent months preparing for this night. Every smile I gave was a shield. Every laugh I faked was a weapon I was sharpening. I was no longer the wife desperate for his love, begging for his attention. I was a strategist, and tonight was the battlefield. I caught my reflection in the tall mirror across the hall. For a split second, I didn't even recognize the woman staring back at me. I looked polished, composed, every hair pinned perfectly in place, but my eyes told a different story. They were colder, sharper, almost unrecognizable compared to the naive woman who had once believed Daniel's promises. Everyone thought tonight was about love, about loyalty, about us. But for me, it was about ending a lie. The night began innocently enough. Guests filtered in, each carrying gifts wrapped in gold paper, bottles of wine, and cards that gushed with congratulations. Daniel worked the room like a politician on election night, shaking hands, slapping backs, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. He loved attention. He craved it, and everyone gave it him freely. They always had. 15 years, his mother gushed as she hugged me tightly. You two are such an inspiration. I tell all my friends about you and Daniel, how strong your marriage is. Her words cut like glass, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing in her face. Inspiration, if only she knew. Do you ever feel trapped in a room where everyone is praising the very person who destroyed you, smiling as if they're blind to the knife that's still lodged in your back? That's what it felt like. I stood there, nodding, thanked her, pretending to be touched by her words, while inside my chest a storm was raging. Daniel caught my eye from across the room and winked at me. That stupid, smug wink that used to make me blush when we first dated. Now it made my skin crawl, because I knew the same lips that smiled at me had whispered to someone else late at night. And yet, nobody suspected a thing, because I had become an actress. I laughed when I was supposed to. I leaned into him when the photographers asked for pictures. I let him kiss my cheek, my temple, even my lips, while my mind screamed. If you've ever been betrayed so deeply, you'll understand this strange duality, the way your body can perform on autopilot while your soul burns with rage. I remember standing near the buffet table, the smell of roasted lamb and garlic butter filling the air, when a guest clinked their glass to make a toast. Everyone turned towards us, glasses raised, faces glowing with admiration.
I felt their eyes on me, waiting for the perfect wife to beam proudly, to gush about her perfect husband. And I did. I smiled, but my fingers trembled around the stem of my glass, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of the secret I was carrying. A secret that would detonate in this very room before the night was over. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just another scorned wife nursing heartbreak. I was a woman with a plan. And I had been waiting for this moment for months. The laughter in the hall grew louder as the night went on. Daniel's coworkers slapped him on the back. His friends teased him about how lucky he was to have me. My cheeks ached from smiling, but I kept at it, because every second I endured their praises brought me closer to the moment I would finally flip their world upside down. I caught my reflection with my best friend, Claire. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew enough. She tilted her head at me, her brows knitting as if to ask, "Are you okay?" I gave her the faintest smile, the kind that says, "Trust me, just wait." Inside, I was screaming. Do you know what it feels like to stand next to someone who swore to love you forever, knowing they've been sharing their body, their time, their heart with someone else, and yet they stand there, hand in yours, pretending to be your partner? That's what this night was, a theater of lies, and I played my role perfectly. I excused myself halfway through dinner, retreating to the ladies' room. My heels clicked on the marble floor as I leaned on the sink and stared at my reflection. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. "Just a few more hours. Smile, laugh, endure. Then it's over." My chest tightened, not from nerves, but with anticipation. Because what nobody in that hall knew was that the entire night was a countdown, a fuse, waiting to burn down. And when it did, the explosion would be unforgettable. So when I walked back into that ballroom, my face fresh, my posture perfect, I wasn't just a wife celebrating her anniversary. I was a woman about to burn her husband's carefully constructed world to the ground. Everyone thought tonight was about love, but for me, it was about ending a lie. And by the end of it, nobody in that room would ever look at Daniel the same way again.
If I had to point to the exact moment everything cracked, I would pick one ordinary Wednesday night. Not a holiday, not a fight, just a night like any other, except for one tiny thing, the sound that reached me through a cracked bathroom door. Daniel had always been careless with his phone. He left it on the kitchen counter, face up in the living room charger like a little blinking surrender flag. He thought it was mine to ignore, mine to trawl through when I wanted to know where he was or why he was late. For years, maybe I did the same. Glanced at a screen, seen messages, shrugged them away, told myself I was being petty. The difference now was that petty didn't cut it anymore. Something in my gut had been niggling, a persistent itch that wouldn't stop. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know the house isn't empty even though the lights are off. That night, I had gone to the bathroom to wash my face, an automatic, half-asleep ritual, and I heard him, laughing softly into the phone. Not a laugh with me, not a laugh about sports or work. It was a private laugh, the one people use when they think they're hidden. "Hey," he said, and the tenderness in his voice was a blade. "I miss you. I can't wait to see you again." I froze. Toothpaste foam in my mouth, a sink full of water, and the sound of his voice slick with infidelity slicing straight through everything we'd built. For a stupid frozen second, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe it was a telemarketer or someone quoting a movie. Maybe I was being dramatic. But the next sentence made me want to vomit. He whispered, "Tonight was perfect. She looked amazing with that dress." You know what I mean. I remember the room tilted. The tiles on the bathroom floor became a runway, my soul's aching as I walked out to the living room on autopilot. The TV was still on, some cooking show with bright colors, and Daniel stood by the window, one hand on the sill, the other cradling his phone like a secret. He was talking in that low, conspiratorial voice he used for affairs of the heart or boardroom wins.
I could see the outline of his profile, the slope of his nose, the way his jaw clenched when he lied. I didn't confront him, not yet. I didn't storm in and demand names or fling accusations like a lunatic. I didn't because something smarter, colder, took over. If I exploded then, if I let my pain be more dramatic than my plan, I'd ruin everything. You don't get revenge by yelling. You get revenge by waiting until you can deliver a wound so precise it can't be treated. So I became a listener. Have you ever listened to your own life being dismantled piece by piece while you stood inches away? I've always been a good listener. Maybe that's why he thought he could talk like that, because he trained me to listen without judgment, to absorb and console. He loved the safety of my presence, the way I would offer stability and then keep my mouth shut. That night after he hung up, he wandered into the kitchen for a late glass of wine and didn't even notice my hand on the doorframe, the way I watched him like a scientist watches an experiment gone wrong. He hummed, poured himself a drink, and walked past me, arm brushing my shoulder. He smelled like cologne and cheap charm. He kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened and said, "Long day, babe?" And I answered, voice steady as if reading a script, "Yeah, you too." It wasn't a single phone call that ripped everything apart. It was the pattern that followed. Over the next few weeks, tiny things that had seemed random started to align into a map. A lipstick I didn't recognize on the collar of his shirt, a receipt for a hotel I'd never heard of, a lipstick-stained napkin in the waste bin of his car, careless, like a breadcrumb. Each small careless thing felt at once both obvious and criminal. Each one was a whisper of betrayal. You know how sometimes you replay a moment in your head and you can't believe you didn't see it earlier? I could suddenly see so many little things that fit together like a jigsaw I'd been missing. The sudden late nights at the office, a phrase that once meant work and now meant evenings that didn't involve me. The texts that popped up and he slid away from when I entered the room. The few weekends he had to go out of town for work. Every excuse was a thin veil over the same truth. He'd been putting his other life together without me. I started keeping a journal. It sounds traumatic, but it became my anchor. I wrote down dates, times, names I overheard, descriptions of receipts, the guilty looks he'd give me when I asked small questions. I became a detective in my own marriage. It felt ridiculous and powerful at the same time to sit at my kitchen table with a notebook and categorize the ways my husband had been unfaithful. There's a perverse kind of solace in the methodical. It made the chaos of betrayal tangible. The first time I found proof that couldn't be shrugged away as coincidence, it felt almost underwhelming. I had gone through his laptop. Don't judge me, I know how that sounds. I found a folder labeled with a string of initials. Inside were photos. Daniel and a woman I didn't recognize. At a restaurant, their faces close in an intimacy I had never seen with him. Someone had taken pictures of them laughing, leaning in, touching. The photos were candid, not staged. They looked like a private life caught in public. I spent that night on the couch, the photos glaring up at me like a challenge. The betrayal felt enormous, but also strangely banal, like a common crime caught on camera. I remember thinking, as I scrolled through the images, that if I had found them months earlier, I might have lost my mind. But enough time had passed that my shock had transformed into focus. I wasn't a woman who was going to be reduced to tears in front of family and friends. I was a woman who wanted the truth to be seen by everyone who mattered. Have you ever kept a secret like that? Not hidden exactly, but cataloged? Would you have done the same? Collected a suitcase full of evidence instead of breaking down in the middle of the street? The thing about real betrayal is that your instincts change. Escape and confrontation are fleeting impulses. The steady, lethal urge is precision. I wanted him exposed. I wanted him dismantled, not by my shouts, but by the cold, undeniable facts.
I started following him carefully, not like a horror movie lunatic, but like someone who's learned to read the clockwork of another person's life. I drove behind him once to a hotel in the next city over, sitting in my car while he disappeared into the glass doors. I watched through binoculars once, feeling like a spy and a fool at the same time. My heart thudded hollowly in my chest, not with excitement, but with the hard, dry sound of someone who had been betrayed too often to be surprised anymore. Collection became obsession. I traced credit card statements and matched them with dates. I checked his calendar entries. He was sloppy about those. I found blocks marked dinner or client meeting that coincided with charges at places I recognized from the photos. I pretended to be calm when I asked him about them, allowed him to laugh off my questions. "Oh, that was just dinner with Jared," he'd say, naming friends I'd known for years, and the lie would fall out of his mouth easy as breathing. Watching someone lie with that kind of complacency is like watching someone play at a game you already know how to win. The more I uncovered, the more the affair took on a shape beyond the private betrayal. It was a life he built in plain sight. Furniture stacked and receipts taped to the wall, as if he thought a double life could be neat and organized. That's when my anger turned to a plan. You don't plan an ambush when you're still sobbing into your pillow. You plan it when your grief hardens into a kind of righteous mathematics. Dates, times, evidence, consequence. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my mother. Keeping everything secret felt like an act of control. The moment I let anyone else into the room, the possibility of them talking me out of it, of them begging for reconciliation, of me second-guessing myself, those possibilities would dilute the thing I needed most, the certainty of what I was doing. Besides, there is a particular joy in owning a secret no one suspects. Imagine a woman at the center of a life that appears unbroken, quietly tearing the seams from within. Some nights, when the house was quiet, and the rain hit the windows, I'd run through the worst-case scenarios. I'd imagine him telling him publicly, the scream of my voice echoing off crystal and marble as everyone turned and he stammered. I'd imagine him weeping, apologies streaming, or worse, sneering and calling me bitter. I rehearsed every possible reaction until I felt numb. Rehearsal is different from forgiveness. Rehearsal is a way to steel yourself. And then there was the moment, small, ridiculous, almost cinematic, where I heard him say the name, not on the phone, not in a whisper, but in a careless sentence over breakfast, as if the word meant nothing. "We'll pick up some flowers for Maya," he said, stirring his coffee. My hands went cold. Maya. The name lodged there as if it had always been waiting to snap into the puzzle. I'd read it in the captions of photos, seen it on delivery receipts, and now here it was, said aloud like a brand. Names have power. Names make things real. Now that he had uttered it, I could put a face to the whisper. I started to piece the woman's life together from the fringes, Instagram likes, a tagged location, a LinkedIn profile where the woman, Maya, worked in PR and had the sort of curated life that makes infidelity feel both banal and obscene. She had a smile in her photos that made me want to smash my teeth in, but I didn't. I stored the image in the folder, a file in the cold warehouse of what I had become. There were nights I lay awake imagining confronting her, imagining the humiliation she might feel, but something better than humiliation motivated me. Justice. Embarrassment was fleeting. Justice was systemic. I didn't want to cause Maya pain for the sake of my ego. I wanted to demonstrate to Daniel that his actions had consequences that couldn't be swept away with a limp apology. So I kept stealing pieces of their lives. Sometimes it felt like thievery, riffling through their intimate detritus. I took photographs of hotel bookings, screenshots of messages, copies of invoices. I printed them in black and white like evidence in a cold police procedural. The act of printing was ritualistic, watching the pages pile up, the truth tangibly forming in my hands. Each page was a tiny exorcism. Do you know what the hardest part is when you're gathering proof? It's the easiest part. People who cheat usually think they are smart. They think they hide things well because they hide them in plain sight, assuming the people closest to them are too blind with trust to notice. The truth is, they're sloppy because lying is exhausting. They let their guard down in small pockets, an unguarded laugh, a tossed receipt, and those pockets are all you need. By the time I was ready to act, I had a folder so heavy it almost hurt to lift it. It wasn't just enough for me to know. Others needed to see. The thing about humiliation is it feels better when it's fair. Humiliation can be cruel, yes, but what I wanted was clarity. I wanted the people who admired him to understand the model they'd been idolizing was built on deceit. That night, after the bathroom, after the whispered phone call that started the spiral,
I made myself a rule: no impulsive confrontations. I took a breath, and in that breath I felt something like promise. The marriage didn't end with a fight or a cry. It ended when I decided to collect evidence like currency and spend it on the exact moment that would hurt the most. So when friends later asked me how long the affair had been going on, I would tell them months. I would leave out the exactness because the poison of knowledge is brutal enough without cartography. I would also, if asked, tell them that there was a night, one small, ordinary night, when I heard a voice say, "I can't wait to see you again." And that phrase changed the course of everything. What would you have done if you'd heard that? Would you have slammed the door and ripped the phone from someone's hand? Would you have made a scene? Or would you have been like me? Quiet, calculating, dangerous in your patience. That was the night our marriage ended. He just didn't know it yet.
There's a difference between suspicion and proof. Suspicion is a low, gnawing ache that wakes you at 3 in the morning. Proof is a physical thing, a photo, a receipt, a timestamp that you can put under someone's nose and say, "This is real." Proof makes a liar concrete. Proof makes betrayal undeniable. And I wanted undeniable. The first few weeks after I heard that whispering phone call, I lived in a fog of small discoveries, each one a tiny bruise. But I didn't want bruises. I wanted a wound that would make him remember what he'd done every time he saw his own hands. That meant building something people could look at in daylight without dismissing as he said, she said. So I started collecting, quietly, patiently, like a woman assembling a jigsaw with pieces hidden in different rooms. It began with the obvious: credit card statements. People who cheat are often sloppy with money: flights, hotels, dimmers, things that leave trails. I learned to read those trails. I set up a folder on my laptop called Household and used it as a front so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Behind that folder, I created another labeled harmlessly with initials, and in there I started dropping digital copies of everything I found. Screenshots of bank transactions, online bookings, email confirmations. Each file was a tiny accusation. "Are you sure about this?" Claire asked one night, standing in my kitchen while I spread printed receipts across the counter like evidence at a coronation. "I'm sure," I said, and I remembered the feeling, the sudden lightness at being sure. Suspicion had been heavy. Certainty was perversely freeing. I've matched dates. I've got hotel names, times. He's sloppy, Claire. He uses his card and sometimes he leaves his logins open on his laptop. Claire leaned over the paper like it was someone else's crossword. "God, you should hand this to a lawyer." "And have them ruin my life with paperwork?" I snapped, softer than I meant to. "No. Watch. Wait. We'll do this right." She looked at me, eye searching. "Right how?" "Right," I said, "by making everyone see." There were receipts from dinners at places I'd never been invited to, charges for late-night room service under Daniel's name, and one that made my hands go numb. 2 nights at a hotel 3 hours away, billed under his corporate card and marked as Client Entertainment. The hotel's name matched a photo I'd seen on Instagram with the same lighting, the same bar in the background, the same kind of cheap romanticism you get when someone wants to make a memory that isn't meant for you. Then came the messages. Oh, the messages. They were the small, terrible poetry of infidelity. Short, sweet, urgent. He called her Maya in the text, used emojis I'd never seen him use with me, and sent selfies that were meant to be private. At first, I captured them on my phone, scrolling and screenshotting like a historian cataloging ruins. But screenshots can be faked, I reminded myself. So I learned to print. I printed texts with timestamps, emails with headers, the kind of raw paper proof that lawyers like. Paper doesn't lie. My heart would pound when I found something new. I'd check under the bed of plausible excuses, open drawers he thought were private, log into his accounts, a moral gray area that felt crystal clear to me. This was war, not courtesy. When you're building a case against someone you once loved, every login is a battlefield and every password cracked is a victory. I felt like I was committing a petty crime and a righteous one at the same time. One night, driven by a mixture of rage and curiosity, I followed him. Not in a dramatic tailing him everywhere way, at least not at first, but enough to notice patterns. He left the house at odd times with vague reasons. He stopped answering in the evenings. I learned his routes. The gas station by the highway where he'd stop to smoke like a man collecting courage before a sin. The bakery where he'd buy croissants for clients at 10 a.m. The quiet hotel 2 towns over where his car would appear and then disappear. I don't know how long I sat in my car in those parking lots, watching the light change and thinking about the woman who occupied his afternoons. Sometimes I imagined her as wicked, like a cartoon villain. Other times I imagined her as empty, as if she'd been drawn into this affair the same way a moth falls into a flame, not so much seduced by him as by the idea of someone paying attention. But the truth is, her face on the photos made me feel only a cold mathematical clarity. There was no warmth there, only lines to be connected. The first physical piece of proof that made my hand shake was a photo. It wasn't a scandalous photo. That's what made it perfect. Daniel and Maya sitting at a small table, hands almost touching, a wine glass between them. The photographer had captured the way he leaned in, the tilt of her head. You could see in the way his fingers arranged around the stem of the glass, the kind of tenderness you don't share with your spouse. The image was candid and clinical at the same time. "You want to see?" Claire asked delicately the night I finally showed it to her. She sat on my living room couch and I handed her the print like an offering. She didn't gasp the way I expected. She went quiet, then laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "He's an idiot," she said finally. "He thought he was discreet." "He's a coward," I said. "He wanted the thrill without the consequences." "You know what you could do?" she said, voice low. "You could just hand it to him. Drop everything on the floor and let him have to explain himself." "And say what? Surprise, Daniel, I know you're a cheating bastard." I shook my head. No, that's amateur hour. That's noise. I want evidence that can't be dismissed. I want everyone, family, friends, people from his office to look at their calendars and say, "Oh, that's when he was with her." She nodded slowly. "It would ruin him." "Good," I said. There was also the ugly practicality of financial proof. I pulled up bank statements and started correlating transactions with dates. Names of restaurants matched with photos. Hotel stays matched with messages. One particularly damning moment was when I noticed a charge to an exclusive spa resort. The charge coincided with a message he had sent that late night. "Can't stop thinking about you. Tomorrow is just more time together." The words were enough to make me sick. The charge was enough to make me decisive. I learned to use technology like a scalpel. I recovered deleted emails, a skill I'd never thought I needed until my life depended on it. The trash folder yields secrets if you know how to look. I found reservation confirmations with room numbers, flight itineraries with seat assignments. Details that seemed insignificant suddenly felt like the nails in a coffin. The more specific the item, the harder the lie became to maintain. People ask me now if there were things I would change, if I regret not confronting him sooner. But when you have to thread a needle with a fabric that belongs to other people's lives, impulsiveness can ruin the power of what you are trying to achieve. If I had confronted him early, he would have cleaned up. He would have deleted messages, changed his patterns, become cleverer. Timing matters in this kind of operation. You don't ambush your enemy with a half-built case. You wait until the evidence is so complete that the only options left for him are to lie and lose or tell the truth and die. There was one moment when I thought I might have misjudged everything. I found an email to Daniel from his assistant, innocuous on the surface, about a client dinner. And for one terrible second, I almost believed his lies, that his late nights were about work, that the receipts could be explained. I nearly let myself be reasonable, played the tape of reconciliation in my head. But then I found a message from Maya that referenced a song Daniel had told me he hated, and a line that only someone who'd been close to him would know. It was like a fingerprint. It was the final confirmation. At some point, I realized that the evidence was no longer just for me. It was for the people who had admired him. I wanted their disbelief toggled with things they couldn't ignore, so I printed everything, pages and pages, messages with timestamps, hotel invoices, photo prints, calendar entries, a list of dates that matched up with my own, birthdays he forgot, anniversaries he was working late, the nights I lay awake waiting for the sound of his key. My home office became a war room. I spread the prints across the floor, taped them to the wall, arranged them by chronology like a grim timeline. My notebook, the one I had started writing in after the bathroom, sat open on the desk with neat, methodical notes. I labeled everything: date, location, proof type. The folder thickened. It was heavy in my hands in a way that felt satisfying. I flipped through it sometimes when I couldn't sleep, feeling the proof between my fingers like a talisman. One strange, awful liberty I took was making copies for distribution. If I wanted to destroy him, I needed multiple hands to do it. I had copies made so that, at a chosen moment, people could hold evidence in their own palms and form conclusions free from my narrative. I wanted to remove myself from the role of the angry accuser and turn the situation into objective fact. People respect data. They respect paper. They don't always respect emotion. So I gave them what they'd believe. Have you ever had to render your life into pages? Have you ever held the dozens of small betrayals and arranged them so that they stopped being whispers and became a book? There was power in that. There was also a cold, terrifying clarity. When you make a dossier on someone you love, you realize how much you once gave them. The anger helps, yes, but there's always a thread of grief wrapped through it, a faint mourning for the life that now seems fraudulent. The folder grew fat enough that sometimes I would carry it around under my arm like a trophy. It weighed more than paper. It weighed the betrayal, the wasted years. It weighed the future I'd been robbed of. Claire would look at it and say, "Tomorrow then," and I would nod. "Tomorrow," I'd whisper back. "Tomorrow they'll see." And in my head, despite the strategy and the proof, a small animal of fear circled. What if I was wrong? What if the photos were misinterpreted? What if Daniel had an explanation that made sense? Fear is reasonable. Revenge is not. So I steeled myself, checked and rechecked, made backups, hidden copies, emailed evidence to places that would timestamp it, ensuring nothing could be erased or rewritten. The more I prepared, the less afraid I became. Control has a way of filling the empty places anger leaves. I wasn't just getting ready to accuse. I was preparing to dismantle the very story Daniel had told about us. He had been a legend of fidelity in our small social circle, and legends crumble best when people can see the bricks fall. By the end of it all, the folder sat on my kitchen table, a neat stack of pages with a paperclip, like a tombstone. The truth was no longer just in my head. It was in print. It could be handed out, read aloud, photographed, shared. It would travel faster than any apology he could conjure. I lifted the folder, felt its weight, and for the first time since the whispering phone call, felt something like calm. Proof was not vengeance, but it was the necessary precursor. You can't burn a house down without matches. I had my matches and my gasoline. The rest was timing. One more thing, I thought. One final seal to make sure there was no wiggle room. But I didn't know what that seal looked like. Was it the exact moment I'd show people? The timing? The phrasing of the reveal? Or something else entirely? Something that would make the world take notice and make sure he never recovered his stature. I turned the folder over in my hands, feeling how heavy it had become, and wondered if I could live with what I was about to do. Would I become a monster? Or would I finally be myself again? The answer felt obvious at the time. My future self would be clearer and freer after the purge. But even with certainty, a line remained. You can gather proof, you can plan, you can execute, but you can't unmake the person you've been. By the end, I had a folder thick enough to bury him. But I still needed one last thing: witnesses who couldn't ignore the stack in their hands.
There's a peculiar sound to rage when it's practiced quietly. It's not the cinematic scream or the shattering of plates. It's a careful, low hum that lives just beneath your skin, like an engine idling, waiting for the green light. That hum became my constant companion. I carried it to bed, into the grocery store, under birthday cakes, and through conversations where people praised Daniel like he'd never done anything wrong. I learned how to smother a sob and let the hum sit in its place. The first few weeks after I assembled the folder, I imagined I'd feel liberated, like a dam had broken and the flood would wash me clean. Instead, something colder arrived, a focused, almost surgical rage that was less about noise and more about efficiency. Anger had turned into strategy. I watched myself change. The impulsive, hurt woman who used to shout and smash plates was being replaced by someone quieter. Someone who could sit across from her husband and let him think he was untouchable while she planned the most precise dismantling imaginable. At dinner parties, I perfected a smile that acted like a veil. People told me how lucky I was. "You two always seem so perfect," someone would say, and I'd laugh, as if his infidelity were a funny anecdote and not a slow theft. Daniel loved the spotlight, and I learned to feed him just enough to keep him complacent. The more adored he felt, the more careless he became. It's a sick dynamic. The person you want to punish gives you the very prop you can use to take them down. Do you know what's worse than being humiliated? Being ignored in your humiliation. That's what drove me. The sting of being betrayed and then not being believed by the world I'd helped build. When he'd slip between the sheets with me after a late-night lie, my body would obey, but my mind would catalog the deceit. I lay there counting the breaths that weren't his, memorizing the way his arm rested so I could use that image later when people asked what happened. There is a cruelty in preserving the outward performance of normalcy while your interior collapses, but the cruelty was mine to wield. Silence became my weapon because words are messy. Words can be misinterpreted, shrugged off, or turned back on you. A raised voice can make you look unstable. Tears can be dismissed as theatrics. So I spoke less. I listened more. I learned to place my silence like a stone on the surface of water. The ripples carried everything I wanted them to, but the stone remained unblessed by drama. In social circles, my stoicism read as grace. In private, it read as calm before the storm. Daniel, of course, interpreted my quietness as either remorse or apathy. He started boring me with stories of work, of projects, of clients he'd impressed. He boasted about the promotions he'd been passed up for and the praise he was getting at the office. People asked how we kept our marriage strong. He loved answers that painted him as virtuous. I gave them to him because what I said tonight would not be the truth for long. But the quiet fed my rage in ways that were almost perverse. It let me watch him closely to see the micro-expressions he allowed himself when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The softening of his mouth when he read a text, the way he tilted his head towards someone on the phone, and the tiny smile that widened when he thought of Maya. I started cataloging those expressions too, like evidence in another case file. You don't just expose a body, you expose the knees and elbows and the way it moved. I wanted to show people not just that he had betrayed me, but that he had been emotionally absent long before the physical act. My fury wasn't purely selfish. It was righteous in the small moralities I had once believed in. I had taught my kids to hold doors open for people, to look adults in the eye and say please and thank you. I had been the pillar of our home, the PTA organizer, the birthday cake maker, the laundry folder. There was an idea of me as the quiet domestic force behind a successful man. I wanted to reclaim that image by showing that the architecture of our family had been compromised, that the man people applauded had also been stealing our shared life. The rage settled its rules. No public scenes, no hysterics, no melodrama. I would maintain the facade until the opportune moment. In private, though, it was a different story. I practiced small acts that fed me, returning something he loved and watching him notice, casually rearranging photos so that people would see empty frames where once our vacations had been pictured side by side. I removed the magnets from the fridge that commemorated our first house. I took down the throw pillows he loved, the ones he always complained about. It was petty, yes, but it was also satisfying. One night, I replaced the playlist on his phone with songs from when we were young, the ones that used to make us laugh and dance. I watched him scroll through the track list only to see whether he'd noticed the sentimental choices. He didn't. He plugged in his headphones and left the room to take a call. Small victories bolster you more than you'd think. They serve as reminders that you are still present in the world he is trying to rewrite. I began to change the way I dressed. Not to attract him, the last thing I wanted was for him to feel desired, but to reframe myself in my own mirror. I bought a coat that fell perfectly, an expensive, silent thing that hugged my shoulders like armor. I cut my hair with a blunt confidence I'd never had. These changes felt like reclamation.
When I looked in the mirror, I wanted to see not the betrayed wife, but a woman who could survive the fallout without shattering into someone unrecognizable. The kids, God, the kids, they were my frail soft center and my fiercest anchor. Every plan I made had to protect them. I had to be careful. Men like Daniel are unpredictable when they feel cornered. There were nights I lay awake imagining the worst case scenarios. Would he lash out? Would he try to smear me? Would he use the custody of our little world as a weapon? My rage wrapped around those fears, knitting them into a resolute that was practical, not theatrical. I had to be ready to shield them without tipping my hand.
One evening, while the kids were at their grandparents', Daniel poured himself a drink and started to ramble about how hard it was to manage everything, about how much he wished we could go back to better days. He spoke of nostalgia as if it absolved him. I listened as if I were cataloging a confession. He wanted to talk, to soothe the air, to make it safe for himself. I let him. I sat across from him, the hum of my silent rage steady and patient. "You look tired," I said softly, watching him. "Yeah," he replied, "work's been brutal." "Do you ever," I asked, "that maybe we're just not as compatible as we thought?" It was a soft question, both honest and intentionally obtuse. He blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean, you always seem to find energy for other things," I said. "For work, for friends, for extracurriculars." He laughed, a self-satisfied sound. "Oh, come on, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I folded my hands in my lap, because sometimes I wonder who I married. The man who goes to the office to save the world, or the man who goes to the office to find something else. He turned away like I'd slapped him. "You're impossible." "You think so?" I let my voice even out. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm impossible to buy off with smiles and excuses. He walked out of the room after that, leaving the glass half-finished on the coffee table. He didn't come back with questions. He didn't ask for details. He simply resumed his life. That silence again felt like complicity. It felt like the kind of arrogance that comes when you believe nobody will ever unmask you. The rage was a steady climate inside me now. It warmed with small satisfactions and cooled with moments of crippling sorrow. Sometimes I'd find myself crying in the shower, not because I believed he deserved absolution, but because the enormity of the life I'd been building had been compromised. Betrayal is 1,000 slashes to the same wound. You never stop feeling each cut, even when your plan is underway. But there was a clarity to the anger I had that almost felt holy. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about survival. I was not willing to be someone's second reason or a convenient truth. The rage steadied into something I could rely on. It became discipline. Clinic appointments to talk with a counselor under the guise of relationship maintenance, calls to lawyers supposedly about financial planning, and late nights on the computer where I choreographed the logistics of exposure. I needed allies, so I cultivated them quietly. Claire, who checked in and offered practical support, a paralegal friend who gave me legal boundaries, and a photographer who agreed to help with prints under the guise of family memorabilia. There were moral edges in what I planned to do. I knew that. I'd spent long hours on cold nights asking myself whether I was becoming what I hated. In those minutes of doubt, I'd call to mind the nights I had lain awake, the way he'd whispered another woman's name like it was a secret joke. The answer always returned. This was not vengeance for vengeance's sake. This was reclamation. One of the most personal acts of my silent rage was how I began to reclaim language. I stopped calling him honey in public. I started to use his name instead. Flat, precise, like a label. "Daniel scheduled another dinner tonight," I'd tell a friend. It was small, but language is thievery in itself. It shapes reality. If I could name him plainly, maybe others would see plainly too.
And then there were moments, rare, dangerous, that almost broke me. In the grocery aisle once, I watched him help a little old lady reach for a jar on the top shelf and felt this surge of tenderness toward him. For half a second, I missed him. The way he'd surprise me with coffee, the time he'd built a swing for the kids, the way he'd once looked at me like I was the only person in the room. That tenderness was a soft, sudden betrayal to the rage, and I hated it. It made me honest about how loss is messy. Loving someone and answering with retribution are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist like two predators circling one another. By the time the invitations went out for the anniversary party, my silence was complete. People expected me to perform my role, and I would. But underneath the sequin smile and the poised toast, the silent hum gnawed and prepared. I had become a woman who could wait, who could turn inward and make a plan that would make the world listen. If you've ever been where I was, where your life feels like a stage and everyone around you applauds the wrong actor, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have screamed? Would you have shouted from the rooftops? Or would you have, like me, let the quiet take you and use it to build something that could not be ignored? When the night of the party drew in, I felt something like holy calm. The storm inside me had a map. I had prepared witnesses, printed evidence, and a timing so exact that even the smallest detail couldn't be refuted. The silent rage was no longer an emotion. It was a plan in motion. And there was one truth I held close as we walked into that chandelier-lit room. The louder he celebrated himself, the more precarious his throne would become. Because while he drank in admiration, nobody was paying attention to the fact that I was holding matches.
The invitation was Daniel's idea, of course. That's what still makes me laugh in hindsight. He practically handed me the guillotine and told me to sharpen it. We were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, a glass of wine in my hand, his whiskey sweating against a coaster. He leaned back in his chair, smug from another successful week at work, and said, "You know what we should do? Throw an anniversary party. 15 years. That's a big one. People expect us to celebrate it." I looked at him over the rim of my glass, steady, unblinking. He didn't even flinch. He thought this was a grand romantic gesture, that I'd swoon over his desire to parade me like a prize he'd managed to keep. "Oh," I said lightly, "you think people care about anniversaries?" He chuckled. "Of course they do. People look up to us, to our marriage. We should give them something to celebrate." There it was again, the word us. He said it with the confidence of a man who believed us still existed, who believed he could curate reality the same way he curated his image at work. So I smiled, I nodded, and I let him think the idea was brilliant. That night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. My mind spun faster than the blades. The plan had been vague before. Expose him, make him fall. But now I had the perfect stage. A party. Guess. An audience. His idea. His pride. He would create the stage, and I would control the script. Do you see the poetry in that? Because I do. The next few weeks became a performance of collaboration. I sat across from him flipping through catering menus, pretending to debate salmon versus chicken. I walked with him through the event hall we eventually booked, admiring the chandeliers and polished floors, as though my heart wasn't rehearsing how it would feel to burn his kingdom to the ground. Daniel wanted the guest list to be impressive. Coworkers, clients, extended family, old friends. He wanted every person who thought highly of him to be there, clapping, congratulating, feeding his ego like a starving beast. "Let's make it classy," he said, tapping the list with his pen. "People should look back and say, 'Wow, Daniel really knows how to honor his wife.'"
I had to bite the inside of my cheek from keeping from laughing. Honor his wife. If only he knew how those words would curdle on people's tongues. And here's the part that still makes me shiver when I think about it. He let me handle the invitations. He trusted me with the addresses, the RSVPs, the details. It was the equivalent of giving a wolf the keys to the sheep pen. I sent them out meticulously. Family, mine and his. Friends from college, his colleagues, including the ones he was always trying to impress. But the crown jewel? Maya, his mistress. It was easier than I thought. She had been sloppy, her number popping up in receipts and phone bills. Finding her address wasn't difficult. Writing her name on the cream-colored envelope gave me a satisfaction I can't fully describe. It was like inscribing fate. I didn't invite her as me. I phrased it as though it came from us, Daniel and I, a warm, welcoming invitation to celebrate our love. I sealed it with a neat flourish, picturing her opening it, smug and thrilled at the idea of being under the same roof as me, the clueless wife. What would she feel when the truth unraveled? Pride? Shock? Fear? I wanted to see it all. In the weeks leading up to the party, I played the role so well, I almost scared myself. I laughed at Daniel's jokes. I helped him pick a new suit. I feigned nervousness about the seating chart. He thought I was anxious about whether the food would be good enough or whether the flowers would arrive on time. The truth? I was only anxious about whether I'd timed the reveal perfectly. There's something intoxicating about control, especially when you've been powerless so long. Every yes dear that left my lips was another brick in the wall closing in on him. Every friendly smile I gave at work or during coffee with friends was another disguise. I began to notice the shift in myself. My silence had been anger before, but now it was anticipation. It was the thrill of having a secret that would detonate in the middle of a chandelier-lit hall. One night, I sat at the dining table, long after the kids were asleep. The guest list was spread before me like a war map. I traced my finger along the names, imagining the ripple effect each envelope would create. His boss, his mother, his best man from our wedding, the neighbors who always waved from across the street. And then, her, Maya. I whispered it to myself. Maya, the woman who thought she could carve a piece out of my life and claim it for herself? I thought of the receipts in my folder, the photos, the messages. I thought of how his hands had touched me and then touched her in the same week. I thought of how she probably believed she was special, that she was chosen. The rage flared, sharp and hot, but beneath it a chilling calm. She wasn't chosen. She was disposable, just like me, at least in his mind. That was the beauty of the invitations. When she walked into that party, she wouldn't just see me. She would see all of them, the entire audience. She wouldn't just be complicit in his betrayal. She'd be exposed as part of it. I sealed the last envelope and leaned back, staring at the neat stack. There's something ceremonial about invitations. They're promises of an event, little contracts of attendance. These weren't just invitations. They were summonses, witnesses called to a trial they didn't know they were attending. Daniel thought he was inviting people to a celebration, but I knew the truth. He had built a stage for his glory. I had built a stage for his ruin. And every single person who received one of those envelopes was about to see the real man behind the mask. Have you ever held on to a secret so heavy that it changes the way you breathe? That's what those invitations felt like. They weren't just pieces of paper. They were the sharp edge of justice, sealed with wax and delivered with a smile. When the last one was sent, I whispered to myself, "It's done." But it wasn't. Not yet. The stage was built. The guests were gathered. But the performance? That was still to come. And the part that kept me awake at night was this.
Once I set it in motion, there would be no turning back. Because in less than a month, my husband wasn't going to host an anniversary. He was going to host his own execution. You ever notice how the quietest plans are made with the loudest attention to detail? The actual act of revenge isn't fireworks and grand speeches in rehearsal. It's stamps and envelopes, font choices on printed messages, and the tactile sound of paper sliding into a folder. The real terror sits in minutia. That's where I lived for weeks, in font sizes, in the caliper of each photocopy, in the positioning of photos on a sheet so they could not be misread. I started in my small, pale office, my war room, where the folder from Chapter 3 had migrated into a sort of grim centerpiece. The evidence had cooled enough to be handled without my hands shaking, but the heat of the plan kept me awake. I bought a printer that could produce crisp, believable images and a quality of paper that looked official. Not too glossy, not too cheap. If I wanted people to treat this as truth and not drama, presentation mattered. There's a surprising dignity in choosing the right cardstock. Claire came over with her usual supply of compassion and black coffee. She didn't ask many questions. Anyone who knows her knows she listens in short sentences and long pauses, perfect for long conspiracies. I handed her the stack of printed messages and hotel receipts and asked her to help me fold them into envelopes. "Who are these for exactly?" she asked, but didn't pry at the edges I flagged. "For everyone," I said. "Everyone who needs to know." We worked silently for hours, folding, sealing, writing names in my careful block letters. The envelopes were unassuming, cream with a little wax sticker I had bought for theatrical effect, and inside each one was a different kind of truth. Some had hotel invoices, some had incriminating text threads printed with timestamps and little arrows I'd added to point out the most damning lines. Some had photos. I mixed them deliberately so that no single envelope was identical in tone. I wanted the room to be messy when the papers were opened, face after face, a different kernel of proof for everyone, all adding up. You could almost hear the plan assembling itself in that room. Cardstock slid into paper trays. The printer complained once and then hummed, and over we printed, collated, and folded. I won't lie. The act of making those envelopes felt almost ceremonial. There was power in the repetition. Print, fold, press the wax, write a name, place into the bag. The envelopes were small, but lethal. I also prepared a master packet, the complete dossier, intended not for casual hands, but for the people whose influence could create consequences. His mother, his boss, our mutual friends who had sway, the one neighbor who always talked to the local newspaper columnist at the dog park. Those master packets were thicker, bound with a paperclip and a calm label for immediate review. I imagined those packets landing in people's laps like stones. I wanted them to be heavy, literal and metaphorical. But the plan couldn't rely solely on paper. People are unpredictable. Some might fold the envelope and tuck it away. Some might assume it was a prank. So I layered my strategy. I created a signal with the venue staff. A server wearing a green tie would start handing out the envelopes after my toast. I had met with the event coordinator under the pretext of a special moment in the evening and convinced them that these sealed envelopes were part of an anniversary game we were doing, something about guests writing down favorite memories. The coordinator, a soft-spoken man named Arthur who loved gossip more than his job, loved the theatricality and agreed without knowing the content. Greed is useful when you need complicity. I rehearsed the moment in my head more nights than I can count. I pictured myself standing with a glass raised, voice trembling, then finding my center. I pictured Arthur nodding at the staff. I pictured the waiter's hand dipping into a bag and starting to distribute the envelopes. Timing was crucial. Too early and Daniel could intercept them and shred the proof. Too late and the impact would be muted. The window had to be after my toast, when everyone was focused on me and the room was still reverent. The reveal had to be surgical. Then there was the human variable, Maya. Inviting her had been complicated, for reasons that were mostly ego and some practicality. I wanted her there unaware, because the sight of her among family and coworkers would tear open any illusion she had about exclusivity. But I also considered the possibility she might not come, or worse, that she might have a friend with her who'd warned Daniel. For that contingency, I prepared digital backups, an untraceable email shell set up to send the same packets to targeted inboxes at the exact moment. If the staff faltered, my secondary plan would trigger. You'd be amazed at how long it took to build an untraceable email. There are tutorials and dumb mistakes and a lot of trial and error. I learned to think like someone who wanted to leave no fingerprints. I sent copies of key documents to an anonymous account that would forward them to several people simultaneously the moment I clicked send. I rehearsed this in my living room at midnight, watching the same papers appear in several inboxes like a constellation. It felt like modern witchcraft. Then there were the legalities. I spoke carefully to a paralegal friend, but we kept the conversations intentionally vague. I knew the boundaries. Invasion of privacy is a real legal sword, and one I didn't want wielded against myself. That's why I'd avoided hacking beyond what was necessary, and why I'd focused on receipts, photos, and messages that had been given to me through means that wouldn't come back to haunt me. If he sued, I wanted the evidence to be admissible, not a self-inflicted wound. The paralegal advised me on what I could and couldn't do, and suggested that public humiliation often short-circuits legal action because the defendant's options become defensive and reactive. I like that phrasing, short-circuit. On a practical level, I also had to think about the kids. I set up a plan for them to be at their grandparents' while the crescendo happened. No children at this kind of ritual. I knew too well how cruelty could ripple into little lives, and I drew a firm line. The children's safety was priority one. The revenge came with adult containment. I had Claire help arrange childcare and keep the kids occupied at their grandparents with cookies and cartoons. Claire was a saint in flip-flops during this whole ordeal.
The night before, I walked through the venue with Arthur and the staff. I timed the lighting, the music cues, the microphones. I even practiced a few lines of the toast in an empty dressing room so I'd know how the acoustics would carry. You can rehearse empathy, I realized, but you shouldn't, otherwise it sounds fake. So I prepared the emotions, real, raw, honest, around the lie without practicing the exact lines. The toast had to sound spontaneous enough to be believed, but controlled enough to guide the evening's narrative. I also prepped for fallout management. People will do strange things when they feel proximate embarrassment. Scream, run, call cops, create scenes. I had a friend on speed dial who could step in to remind people to stay calm, and another who would lock down social media for an hour to prevent live video from spreading before the dust settled. Yes, I wanted the truth public, but not in a way that could cause harm to my children or me beyond what was necessary for the consequences to take root. There's a balance. You want the world to see their crimes, but you also want to protect your own life's continuity. The envelopes were packed into a velvet bag, a theatrical touch that Arthur loved. He kept asking me why it was so fancy, and I lied. Presentation matters. And in that lie was the entire plan. Formality as camouflage. On the day, I woke early and moved through rituals, yoga stretches that steadied my breathing, a green tea that went untouched because my stomach felt hollow, lipstick applied with surgical concentration. People think revenge is all storm and adrenaline, but much of it was a choreography of mundane tasks that kept my hands busy so my mind wouldn't reconcile the finality of it all. I also had to practice my face. How do you smile when you know you're about to break someone's life apart? I tried in the mirror. Soft smile, slight tilt of the head, a softness in the eyes that suggested vulnerability. It sounds dramatic, but your face is a public contract. People believe what they see there. I wanted to look like the wronged wife making a brave toast, not a woman about to unleash paperwork like a loaded gun. At one point that morning, Daniel came into the dressing room. Arrogant, bright, smelling like cologne and false praise. He kissed me on the cheek, asked if I was nervous, and I said, "A little." He laughed. "You'll be great." He squeezed my hand and left. He had no idea I'd rehearsed the exact moment his downfall would begin. He had no idea the envelopes he would think were part of a game would become his indictment. My heart did something that felt like betrayal to me. It beat fast, and in the beating, there was a pulse of grief so wild I almost broke.
For an absurd second, I wished none of this had happened and that the man beside me had been different. That is the strangest thing about revenge. It sits alongside grief, companionable and ugly. They cohabited in me like roommates that never reconciled. The staff had been instructed on the signal, and Arthur had his own packet with specific set of directions. I had paid him well. You begin to learn that money buys loyalty when words do not. He was excited in the way small men are when given power. He straightened the tablecloths, adjusted the silverware, and nodded at me like a general who had seen the map and wanted the glory. I stood at the edge of the room before doors opened, holding the velvet bag with the envelopes inside. It felt like a relic, heavy and holy. The initial guests would start to trickle in, all unaware they were walking into a courtroom. The humming blood in my ears was tuned to a single thought: do not falter. And yet, even with the plan laid out and every contingency anticipated, I couldn't help but feel one small, nagging fear. What if in the moment my voice failed me? What if the tremor I had rehearsed became a full collapse? The human body betrays us in small ways. My hands could shake, my tongue could slip. All the careful logistics in the world can't fix a single, soft, human failure. I found the corner where the staff kept drinks and placed the velvet bag under the table like a relic. I breathed, pulled my phone from my clutch to review the anonymous email draft one last time, and then tucked it away. I had 3 fail-safes. Arthur's staff would distribute, the anonymous email would send, and Claire had a copy she would lift to the press if things went sideways. Then my cue came. I was to make the toast at a moment when dessert had been announced, but before the final speeches. The music lulled, a violinist struck a quiet chord, and the room's chatter dimmed. My breath was a metronome. I rose. The soft scrape of my chair was louder than I expected. Heads turned. Daniel's smile was confident, unearned, his eyes gleaming with someone who thinks he's about to be honored. Mine met his for a beat, and I saw nothing but surprise and pride there. I practiced compassion for that moment earlier. None came. I only felt the full weight of what I was about to do. My voice trembled on the first words, the practice tremor that suggested vulnerability. But then I found the center I'd worked for and let the rest of the speech ride on measured calm. I said, to 15 years, to love, to family, to... I paused and let the dramatic beat hang there so the cameras, some of his colleagues were live streaming, the shallow, performative kind of social media worship, could feel the air change. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my voice kept steady. I talked about the good things as a preface because truth tastes bitter without context. I mentioned the trips, the small kindnesses, the children's laughter. People nodded, some smiled. And I want to make a small toast, not only to what has been good, but to what we all think we know about each other. I smiled, sweet and small like a trader's lullaby. Tonight, I said, and my hand reached in a motion I'd practiced 1,000 times toward the server standing discreetly in the corner with the velvet bag. A green tie glinted in the lamplight, and the server, our signal, began to distribute envelopes, slipping them like secret letters into hands that thought they were holding mere party favors. I watched faces as the envelopes unfolded, curiosity, a laugh, then a slow blankness as the first photos were unfolded and the first receipts were read. Gasps started like a ripple and then grew into an undertow. And that's when I saw Daniel's smile begin to fade.
The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not music, not conversation, not even argument. It was the sound of silence breaking in waves. At one table, a laugh snapped shut halfway through. At another, a fork clinked against the glass too loudly, the hand that held it suddenly frozen. I watched shoulders hunch, heads lean close, the rustle of paper becoming louder than the violinist who had faltered and let his bow hover midair. I raised my glass as if I hadn't noticed the shifting atmosphere. I spoke about love, about commitment, about truth in the most measured voice I could summon. It was camouflage, my words, a distraction while the storm seated itself at every table. Daniel sat across from me at the head table, legs crossed, posture smug, smile plastered. At first, he didn't even glance at the envelopes. He thought it was some sentimental trick, photos from our marriage, maybe letters from guests, a game. His arrogance was so intact, it blinded him. He actually winked at me, as if to say, "You're outdoing yourself." But then, finally, he noticed. A cousin across from us went pale. One of his coworkers whispered too loudly, her hand covering her mouth. And the neighbor, bless her intrusive heart, held up a photo so close to her glasses that even from where I stood, I could see the image. Him, bare-chested, lips against the woman who wasn't me, Maya. Daniel leaned forward then, still smiling, still smug, but I saw the muscle twitch in his jaw. He whispered something to his friend at his side, dismissive, like he was brushing away a fly. His friend didn't laugh. He just slid the envelope back onto the table, hands stiff as if it might burn him. I continued my toast as if nothing was wrong. We share moments, we share laughter, but sometimes we forget. Truth has a way of finding us, even when we try to hide it. I let that last line hang heavy in the air. Several guests stopped pretending to look at me and started looking at him. Daniel's hand shot out then, plucking the envelope from his plate. He opened it with deliberate slowness, the way a man does when he believes he's still in control. His eyes scanned the page, flicked to the next, then the next, and then he did something I'll never forget. He laughed. A full, hearty laugh. He leaned back in his chair and let it roll across the table as though mocking the entire room. "This," he said, waving the papers like confetti, This is ridiculous." He looked at me then, the smugness carved deep in his expression. "Really, darling? You went to all this trouble for, what, some Photoshop games?" He chuckled again, eyes darting to the crowd. "Come on, everyone. Everyone knows anyone can fake text these days." But no one laughed with him. His voice echoed in the silence like a bad punchline. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him, and not with sympathy, with disgust, with pity, with the first sparks of recognition that the man they admired was about to collapse in real time. He tried again. "This is absurd. You all know me." He gestured broadly as though his charm could still carry the room. "Look at her. She's making a scene." He jabbed a finger in my direction, the smug grin thinning at the edges. "She's lost it." The smugness was cracking now, tiny fissures spiderwebbing across his performance. His collar looked too tight. He tugged at it even though the room was cool. His smile kept breaking into sharp lines of panic before he forced it back into place. And then he caught sight of Maya. She had arrived late, dressed too carefully in a silk dress that tried to blend in, but only screamed louder. She was seated toward the middle, and when she opened her envelope, the blood drained from her face. I watched her stare at the photo, her photo, and I saw the way her lips parted just enough to whisper, "Oh my God." The room followed her gaze, and then Daniel knew. He knew the illusion was finished. His smugness couldn't mask the evidence when the evidence itself was staring back at him in human form. Still, he tried. "These are lies," he barked, now louder, desperate. "She's making fools of you all." He rose from his chair, papers in his hand, and slammed them onto the table. The laughter was gone. His voice was brittle. He looked like a man trying to hold water in his fist as it slipped through his fingers. And me? I just smiled, glass raised, heart steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on trial. He was. The smug husband was unraveling, and everyone could see it.
I stood there with my glass raised, and for a split second, I swear the room itself stopped breathing. The clinking of silverware, the faint hum of music, the whispers between tables, all of it vanished under the weight of what was happening. Every eye was on me. Daniel's smug grin had withered into something hollow, but he still stood tall, as though posture alone could salvage dignity. His hand rested on the back of his chair, knuckles white, veins in his forearm twitching. He was trembling, though he'd rather die than admit it. And then, my voice.
It came out quieter than I expected at first. Soft, almost fragile. To 15 years, I began, my hand shaking just enough to look believable. 15 years of love, laughter, and lies. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard a fork clatter against china. Someone whispered, "Did she just say lies?" Daniel's face went crimson. He moved toward me, hand outstretched like he could snatch the words out of the air. But I stepped back, holding my glass high, my voice sharpening like a blade. To 15 years of loyalty. I paused, eyes boring into his. Or so I thought. The silence broke like glass shattering, gasps, murmurs, shifting chairs. People began tearing into their envelopes with renewed urgency, as if my words had unlocked their fear of looking. And that's when I gave the signal. The staff, 3 servers who had been instructed days earlier, moved through the room, handing out the rest of the envelopes, dozens of little white bombs landing on linen tablecloths. One by one, they were torn open. One by one, the evidence spread like wildfire. The sound that followed was unforgettable. A mix of shock, disbelief, betrayal, gasps, exclamations, chair scraping. Some guests muttered, "Oh my God," while others sat frozen, papers trembling in their hands. His coworkers exchanged sharp looks. His mother pressed a hand to her chest. His best friend muttered something I couldn't hear, but the venom in his tongue was unmistakable. And then, all at once, the spotlight turned to Maya. She hadn't moved. She sat stiffly in her chair, envelope open in front of her, staring at the damning evidence of her existence. She looked up, eyes wide, face pale. People began to notice her. Whispers shot across the room like arrows. "That's her! That's the woman! She's in the photos!" I let the silence stretch, let the room do half my work for me. Then I said calmly, deliberately, "To Daniel's 15 years of love, though clearly not all of it was mine." The weight of that landed. You could feel it in the room. The shift was seismic, no longer confusion, but clarity, a collective understanding that they weren't watching a party anymore. They were witnessing an execution. Daniel lunged toward me, then desperate, sputtering words that barely made sense. This is insane. You can't just, these are lies. All of them. She's making this up." His voice cracked, the confident temper gone. He looked around, eyes wild, searching for allies. None came. Even his mother didn't meet his gaze. I lowered my glass slowly, my arm finally steady. My eyes met Maya's. For the first time that night, she looked away first, shame washing over her face like a tidal wave. Then Daniel turned back to me, voice ragged. Why? Why are you doing this?" And I smiled. A real smile. Small, sharp, and final. "Because Daniel," I said, "you handed me the microphone." The hall erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in chaos. Guests speaking over each other, demanding answers, whispering judgments. Some pushed their chairs back, standing to leave. Others stayed seated, stunned, like they couldn't trust their legs to move. And in the middle of it all, Daniel stood exposed. Naked without being stripped, guilty without trial. The toast was over. The execution had begun. The sound of envelopes tearing, gasps echoing, voices rising, it all blended into a single chaotic hum, like the room itself was alive, convulsing. People weren't whispering anymore. They were pointing, staring, moving their chairs back like Daniel might contaminate them if they stayed too close. And Daniel? He was unraveling in front of me. He still stood at the head table, his face blotchy red, his collar damp with sweat. His hair stuck to his forehead, and the once polished suit he had preened over just hours before now clung awkwardly to his frame, like fabric rebelling against its owner. His hands shook as he grabbed the papers in front of him, holding them up like proof of innocence. These are fake. Don't you people see? She's jealous. She's making things up. This is her trick. No one bought it. Not anymore. His boss leaned back in his chair, lips pressed tight. His best friend from college shook his head slowly, muttering, "Jesus, man." His sister stared at him like he was a stranger. And then Maya. She had tried to stay invisible, head down, hair cascading like a curtain to shield her face, but the room found her. Guests turned, fingers pointing, whispers slicing through the air. She shifted uncomfortably, gripping her clutch so hard her knuckles whitened. "Is that her?" someone asked aloud. "That's her, isn't she?" All at once Maya stood. Her chair screeched backward, toppling against the floor. Every head followed her. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting between me, the crowd, and Daniel. For the first time all night, she looked small, like a child caught stealing. "Don't look at her," Daniel roared, lunging forward. She's not involved. This is all a lie, all of it." But the evidence, the photos, the receipts, the texts, lay spread across every table. Lies couldn't cover them now. The truth was in the ink, and ink doesn't lie. Maya muttered something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. She grabbed her bag and fled, heels clacking furiously against marble. The massive doors swung shut behind her with a hollow boom that felt final. And then Daniel was alone. The guests turned back to him, their judgment heavy, suffocating. His mask crumbled. The smug husband who had once controlled every room he entered now looked like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. His voice shrank to a whimper. "Please, you have to believe me. It's not what it looks like." But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. And I just sat down, calm, collected, sipping my champagne, as if I hadn't just orchestrated the destruction of a man's life in front of 200 witnesses. For the first time in years, I felt light, free, whole. The guests started to clap then, not for him, but for me. Not in unison at first, but slowly a ripple of approval, of solidarity. People stood, some walked over to squeeze my hand, whispering, "You're so strong, you didn't deserve this, good for you." Their support wrapped around me like a shield, but I didn't need it. Not anymore. Daniel slumped into his chair, face buried in his hands. He didn't even try to stop them. He just sat there, shaking, humiliated. And in that moment, I realized something. The applause wasn't just for me. It was the sound of a kingdom collapsing. The toast had been the spark. The collapse was the fire. And Daniel was burning in it.
The next morning, the party hall was still in my head. The echoes of gasps, the snap of envelopes, the hollow slam of doors after Maya fled. But in my chest, silence. For the first time in years, silence that felt like peace. I woke up in the guest room. I hadn't bothered going back to our bed. Daniel had stumbled in sometime around dawn, his shirt wrinkled, tie discarded like a noose on the floor. I didn't hear him cry, but I know he did. His face in the bathroom mirror told me everything. Puffy eyes, blotchy skin, that look of a man who thought he was untouchable and had been proven wrong. I didn't speak to him. I didn't need to. My words had been spoken in front of everyone who mattered. Anything left to say would be wasted breath. Instead, I slipped on a pair of flats, grabbed the neatly prepared manila folder from my desk, and walked out the door. Inside that folder, divorce papers, already filed, finances already rearranged, accounts already shifted, assets already secured. He thought I was the fool. He thought I'd be blindsided, scrambling, powerless. He didn't know that while he was sneaking off to hotel rooms, I was meeting with lawyers. While he was lying to my face, I was quietly disentangling myself from every string he thought he had me tied to. My lawyer greeted me with a smile when I handed over the final sign forms. "You really planned this well," she said. I just nodded. Planned wasn't the right word. Engineered. Every step, every detail, every envelope had been placed like dominoes, leading to that night. And now the last one had fallen. When I returned home, the house felt different.
Not because of him. He was still there, sulking in the living room, scrolling through his phone like he was searching for a way to undo time itself. But because of me. I wasn't pretending anymore. The air didn't feel heavy. The silence wasn't suffocating. I walked past him without a word, heels clicking against the hardwood, my purse over my shoulder. He looked up at me with eyes that begged, but I didn't pause. His lips parted like he wanted to explain, to argue, to bargain. But what was left to say? The world had seen him for what he was. His mistress had abandoned him. His family no longer defended him. His career would collapse soon enough once the whispers from that night spread like wildfire. He had built his own pyre. I had just lit the match. I didn't slam the door behind me when I left. I didn't need to. Quiet exits are sometimes louder than rage. I walked to my car, slid inside, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel. And then, for the first time in years, I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not broken, but whole, light, free. Daniel wanted a party to celebrate himself. Instead, he hosted his own funeral. And I was the one who gave the final toast. And now, here I am, free. Lighter than I felt in years. My revenge is complete. The man who betrayed me is ruined. The mask ripped from his face for everyone to see. His mistress is gone. His family won't look at him the same. His career, well, I don't think his clients are going to be lining up after what they witnessed. But here's the part I can't stop turning over in my mind. What now? Do I forgive? Do I forget? Part of me wonders if holding on to the hate will only chain me to him longer. Haven't I already given him enough of my life? Haven't I already wasted too many nights crying in silence, too many mornings pretending everything was fine? Maybe walking away, clean and quiet, would be the real revenge. But then again, maybe letting him suffer is the point. Maybe every whisper behind his back, every pitying glance, every lost opportunity is exactly the justice he earned. So I'll ask you, what would you do? Would you forgive the man who betrayed you, or would you let him drown in the consequences of his own choices? Because I can't decide. Not yet. If you felt every twist of this story, join the community by subscribing and turning on notifications. I share these long-form narratives because your voices, your comments, and your experiences make them real. Stick around, because the next story might just feel too close to home.